You won't believe what I saw the day I came back early to my lake cabin. It was supposed to be a simple weekend away, nothing more than a chance to escape from the chaos of work and the constant headaches of dealing with the Homeowners Association, but life has a funny way of surprising you when you least expect it. My original plan was to be out of town for a full week, but a last-minute change in my schedule meant I had to cut the trip short. I figured I'd return quietly, enjoy some unexpected downtime, maybe sit by the lake with a hot cup of coffee, and soak in the peaceful silence. Instead, what I found was anything but peaceful, and what I walked into that day was the beginning of one of the most unbelievable confrontations of my life. As I drove up the familiar gravel road leading to my cabin, something didn't sit right in my gut. From a distance, I could see the garage door was wide open. That in itself was unusual because I always made sure it was locked tight before leaving. My cabin was my sanctuary, a place where I kept everything safe, from fishing gear to old family heirlooms. The open door was the first red flag. As I pulled closer, my stomach twisted even harder when I saw beer bottles scattered across the porch steps like they had been tossed there without a second thought. Loud music blasted from inside, some thumping bass that echoed through the trees, completely shattering the peaceful quiet I loved about this place. I parked the truck, stepped out, and froze for a moment, trying to take it all in. This wasn't just some accident. Someone was living here, at least that's what it looked like. The porch had greasy pizza boxes stacked against the wall, and a pair of muddy boots I didn't recognize were sitting right by the door. My pulse started racing as I fished my keys out of my pocket, forcing myself to stay calm. Whoever was inside clearly wasn't supposed to be there. The moment I opened the door, my fears were confirmed. A guy I had never seen before in my life was sprawled out on my couch like it was his personal throne. He had his shoes on, his legs stretched across the cushions, one arm hanging lazily off the side while the other gripped the TV remote. The smell of cheap beer mixed with leftover pizza hit me in the face as soon as I stepped inside. The place looked like a bachelor pad disaster zone. My clean cabin, my carefully maintained escape, had been turned into a messy crash pad. I demanded to know who he was and why he was in my house. The guy didn't even flinch. He looked at me with this smug grin, like he had every right to be there, and said, "Relax, man. My mom said it's cool." His words hit me like a slap. His mom? What did that even mean? And then it all clicked, like puzzle pieces snapping into place. His mom could only be one person, the queen of trouble herself, Karen. Karen was the self-appointed ruler of the Homeowners Association, the kind of person who had made it her mission to nitpick every single thing I did since I first moved into the community. She complained about the color of my shutters, accused me of having my grass half an inch too long, and once even threatened me with a fine for parking my truck too close to the road, even though it was parked in my own driveway. I had dealt with her constant harassment for months, but this was a whole new level. I stared at the guy, who by now had made himself a little too comfortable in my living room, and tried to process the insanity of what he had just told me. "Your mom said it's cool," I repeated, barely able to keep my voice steady. "This is my cabin. Who do you think you are?" But he just laughed, turned up the TV volume, and leaned back like he was the king of the castle. "Don't worry about it," he said casually, waving his hand like I was the one intruding. "She told me I could use this place while you were gone. You're hardly ever here anyway, so chill out." My blood pressure spiked. Not only had this deadbeat broken into my home, but he was also acting like I was the one trespassing. I looked around, and my jaw clenched tighter. The coffee table was covered in soda cans, crumbs, and half-empty chip bags. A blanket from the guest room was crumpled on the floor. Even worse, my fridge door was hanging open, stuffed with cheap beer and leftovers I certainly hadn't bought. Every corner of the cabin screamed disrespect. It wasn't just the fact that he was here, it was the entitlement in his tone, the way he looked at me like I was in the wrong. My cabin was my safe space, a property I worked hard for, and now some kid, fueled by his mother's arrogance, had turned it into a playground. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay calm. The last thing I wanted was to make the situation spiral further out of control, but at the same time, I wasn't about to let this slide. I told him to get out, firm, direct, no room for negotiation. And yet, he just smirked again, like this was some kind of joke. He actually leaned forward, grabbed a slice of cold pizza from the box on the table, and took a bite right in front of me, chewing slowly as if to prove how little he cared about what I had just said. That smugness, that total lack of respect, told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This wasn't some kid accidentally in the wrong place. This was deliberate. He thought he had the right to be here because his mother, the almighty HOA Karen, had told him it was okay. In that moment, a storm of emotions hit me all at once: shock, anger, disbelief, even a bit of fear. But beneath all that was one crystal clear thought: this wasn't going to end quietly. Whatever game Karen thought she was playing, it had just crossed the line into something far more serious, and I knew the fight that was coming would be bigger than any of her petty HOA complaints. The guy lounging in my cabin didn't even seem fazed by my anger. He leaned back deeper into the couch cushions, his greasy fingers smearing cheese onto my armrest, and he actually chuckled as if the whole thing was some hilarious misunderstanding. My patience was already wearing thin, but when he opened his mouth again, it became clear he wasn't just some clueless kid. He was entitled, arrogant, and full of the same kind of attitude that made his mother the nightmare HOA president everyone in the community despised. "Look, dude," he said between bites of pizza, "this is no big deal. My mom told me you weren't around, so she said I could crash here. I've been keeping an eye on the place for you. You should be thanking me." He pointed his greasy slice toward me like he was doing me a favor, completely ignoring the mess he'd already made. I felt the heat rising in my chest. "Keeping an eye on the place?" I shot back. "You broke into my cabin, drank my drinks, trashed my porch, and invited who knows how many people here. That's not watching my property, that's trespassing." He rolled his eyes, clearly annoyed that I wasn't buying his nonsense. "Man, chill. You act like it's the end of the world. You're hardly here anyway. What's the point of having this place if you don't let people enjoy it? Besides, the HOA runs this community. My mom's on the board, so technically, she's in charge. That means I'm allowed to be here." That one sentence hit me like a truck. He really believed that the HOA controlled private homes. The sheer ignorance was almost laughable if it hadn't been so infuriating. "The HOA doesn't own my cabin," I said firmly, stepping closer so he could see just how serious I was. "They manage common areas, the clubhouse, the walking trail, maybe the playground. But my property is mine. It's legally deeded in my name. Your mother has zero authority over it, and you sure as hell don't have permission to be here." Instead of backing down, he leaned forward, pizza crumbs falling onto my rug, and smirked. "See, that's where you're wrong. My mom told me this place is part of the HOA's jurisdiction. So yeah, I can be here. You don't like it? Take it up with her." I was stunned. The level of brainwashing Karen had put into her son was beyond belief. He wasn't just squatting in my home, he genuinely thought he was entitled to it. My hands were shaking with anger as I pulled out my phone. "Fine," I said, my voice cold. "We'll let the sheriff sort this out. You're leaving one way or another." The moment I started dialing, he panicked. "Whoa, whoa, hold on," he shouted, scrambling off the couch. His sudden nervousness was proof he knew he was in the wrong, but instead of apologizing, he doubled down. "You don't need to call anyone. I'll clean up, all right? I'll even stock the fridge before I leave." I shook my head, unimpressed. "It's too late for that. You never should have been here to begin with." Before he could say another word, I heard the sound of heavy footsteps on the porch. The door flew open, and there she was, Karen herself, storming in like she owned the place. Her face was already red with rage, her finger pointing at me before she even took a breath. "What do you think you're doing here?" she shrieked, her voice so shrill it made the hair on my neck stand up. I blinked in disbelief. "What am I doing here?" "This is my cabin, Karen." "What is your son doing here?" She ignored my question completely, brushing past me to fuss over her son like he was a victim. "Are you all right, sweetie? Did this man scare you?" Her son nodded dramatically, playing right into her act. "He just barged in, Mom. He's freaking out." That was it. My jaw nearly hit the floor. They were actually trying to flip the situation, to make me the intruder in my own home. "Enough," I snapped, pointing toward the door. "Both of you need to leave. Now." But Karen wasn't about to back down. She puffed up her chest and jabbed her finger in my direction. "You don't have the right to throw us out. This property falls under HOA authority, and I'm the president. As long as my son needs a safe place, he has every right to be here." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You're insane," I said bluntly. "The HOA doesn't own private homes. This is my property, paid for with my money, and I have the deed to prove it. Neither of you have any claim to it." Karen's eyes narrowed, her lips curling into a smug little smile. "We'll see about that," she hissed, pulling out her phone. Before I could stop her, she dialed 911, putting on her best, helpless victim act. "Yes, officer," she cried into the phone, her voice suddenly trembling. "There's a dangerous intruder in one of the community cabins. He's harassing me and my son. Please, send someone right away." I stood there in stunned silence, my phone still in my hand, while she clutched hers like a weapon. She was lying through her teeth, and she sounded so convincing that I knew the deputies would rush over immediately. And when they got here, it would be my word against hers, unless I stayed calm and let the truth speak for itself. Her son shot me a smug grin, like he had already won. "Told you, man. Mom's got this handled. You're in way over your head." I clenched my jaw, refusing to let them see how rattled I really was. My entire body buzzed with adrenaline, my mind racing through every possible outcome. They thought they had me cornered, but what they didn't know was that I had already taken steps months ago to protect myself from Karen's nonsense. I had every legal document ready, every deed and ID tucked neatly in a folder right by the front door. So let them call the cops, I thought. Let them try to twist the story. When the deputies arrived, they were going to learn the truth, that Karen's HOA power stopped at the edge of her imagination, and that her son's little vacation was about to come to a very abrupt end. But as we stood there waiting for the sirens, the tension only grew thicker. Karen paced back and forth, rehearsing her story out loud about the dangerous intruder. Her son sprawled back on the couch again, smug as ever, acting like the deputies would hand him the keys to my cabin once I was dragged away. And me? I stood silently by the door, folder in hand, my heart pounding like a drum, ready to prove once and for all that they had crossed a line they could never come back from. The sound of sirens grew louder as the deputies raced down the narrow lake road, their lights flashing red and blue against the trees. Karen, standing in my living room like a self-proclaimed queen, suddenly straightened her back and clutched her son's arm as though she were shielding him from some great danger. She even forced tears into her eyes, practicing her victim expression in the reflection of my window. It was almost unbelievable how far she was willing to go with this performance. Her son, meanwhile, slouched back on the couch with his feet on my coffee table, grinning like a kid who thought he'd already won the game. The arrogance in his eyes told me he was convinced the deputies were going to treat him like the rightful resident and haul me away. When the door burst open and two deputies stepped inside, Karen launched straight into her act. "Officers! Thank goodness you're here," she wailed, pointing at me with a shaking finger. "That man broke into this cabin. He's terrifying my son. He has no right to be here." Her words tumbled out in a frantic rush, her voice trembling just enough to sound convincing. The deputies exchanged a quick glance, then turned to me. Their hands weren't on their weapons yet, but they were cautious. One of them asked calmly, "Sir, can we see some identification?" I had been waiting for this exact moment. Without a word, I reached for the folder I had tucked under my arm, placed it neatly on the dining table, and slid it open. My driver's license, the deed to the cabin, utility bills, and even my property tax receipts, all right there, ready for inspection. "My name is on every single document," I said evenly. "This is my home. I came back early from a trip to find this woman's son squatting here without permission. She's lying to you." The deputies leaned over the paperwork, carefully reading through each page. One of them picked up the deed, holding it against my ID, and nodded slowly. The other flipped through the utility bills, my name printed on every single one of them. The silence stretched as Karen fidgeted beside them, her face slowly draining of color. This can't be right," she stammered, her voice losing its confidence. "The HOA owns this property. It's part of the community regulations. He's twisting things." One of the deputies looked up from the paperwork, his expression somewhere between disbelief and annoyance. "Ma'am, the HOA does not own private residences. They only oversee shared spaces, parks, pools, sidewalks. This cabin is legally his. These documents prove it." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Her son sat up straighter on the couch, his smug grin faltering for the first time. "Wait, what?" he muttered, clearly not expecting the deputies to side with me. I folded my arms across my chest, watching their carefully constructed illusion unravel. "I told you," I said firmly. "You had no right to be here. You broke into my home, trashed it, and tried to claim it as your own. That's criminal trespassing, plain and simple." The deputy turned his gaze to Karen's son. "Is that true? Did you enter this cabin without permission?" The kid stammered, his confidence now crumbling. Well. I mean, my mom said it was fine. She's on the HOA board, so I thought it was allowed." The deputy's jaw tightened. Being on the HOA board doesn't give anyone the right to hand out other people's homes. This isn't just a misunderstanding. You're lucky the owner caught you before this escalated further. Karen, desperate to regain control, jumped in again. "Please, officers, you don't understand. My son isn't a criminal. He was just keeping an eye on the place. He meant no harm." But the deputies weren't buying it. One of them stepped closer to her, his tone stern. "Ma'am, filing a false police report is a serious offense. You called 911 and claimed this man was an intruder in his own home. That's not just a mistake, that's deliberately misleading law enforcement. If we wanted to, we could charge you for that." Karen's face turned crimson, her hands trembling. For once, she was speechless. Her son stood awkwardly, rubbing the back of his neck, no longer cocky but suddenly looking like a child caught red-handed. The weight of reality was finally sinking in for both of them. Meanwhile, I couldn't help but feel a wave of satisfaction wash over me. For months, Karen had made my life miserable with her endless rules, fines, and petty complaints. She had acted like she was untouchable, like the HOA gave her power over everyone's lives. And now, in front of law enforcement, her empire of lies was crumbling piece by piece. Still, I kept my tone steady, unwilling to let my emotions take control. "Deputies, I'd like them both off my property immediately. Her son has no business being here, and she has no authority to grant him access. I also want this on record in case they try something like this again." The deputies nodded. "Understood. We'll file a report." One of them turned to Karen's son and barked, "Pack up your things. You're leaving now. The kid muttered under his breath but shuffled around the cabin, grabbing his backpack, a duffel bag stuffed with clothes, and whatever junk food he had stocked. He slammed cabinet doors and stomped his feet, clearly angry but too scared to push back. Karen tried one last time, her voice pleading. Please, officers, don't make this harder than it has to be. My son just needed a place to stay. Surely we can work something out. The deputy's expression hardened. No, ma'am. The only thing that needs to happen is you both leaving this property. Immediately. If either of you step foot here again without the owner's permission, you'll be arrested. Do you understand? Her shoulders slumped in defeat. She nodded weakly, her bravado completely gone. Her son stomped past me, muttering, "This is so unfair," as if he were the victim in all of this. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. As they made their way out the door, one of the deputies turned to me. Sorry you had to deal with this, sir. People get the wrong idea about HOA authority all the time, but this is one of the worst cases we've seen. Rest assured, we'll make a note of it. I thanked them, relief washing over me like a wave. For the first time since stepping onto my porch earlier that day, I felt like I could breathe again. The cabin was mine, the truth was on my side, and Karen's web of lies had finally been exposed for what it was. Karen lingered just outside, glaring at me with eyes full of venom, but she didn't say another word. She knew she had lost. Her son shuffled beside her, carrying his bags like a sulking child who had been grounded. Together, they slunk off into the night, their pride shattered. As the deputies drove away, I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, the silence of the cabin finally returning. It was a silence I had missed, and one I wasn't going to let anyone take from me again. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the last I'd hear from Karen. People like her didn't just admit defeat and move on. They plotted, schemed, and found new ways to stir up trouble. Still, at least for tonight, I had won. My home was mine again, and I had the law on my side. When the deputies left and the flashing lights disappeared down the road, the silence around the cabin was almost deafening. I stood there by the door for a long moment, listening to the faint hum of the night insects by the lake, trying to process everything that had just happened. My cabin, my private sanctuary, had been violated, turned into a hangout spot for someone who thought entitlement was the same as ownership. But now it was quiet again. Now it was mine again. I should have felt nothing but relief, but there was still this simmering fire in my chest, a mixture of anger, disbelief, and exhaustion. I walked slowly through the cabin, taking in the damage. The pizza boxes on the counter were stacked high, greasy stains seeping onto the wood. Empty beer cans littered the floor. One of my lamps was tilted sideways, its shade cracked. My rug had muddy footprints smeared across it, and crumbs seemed to be everywhere I looked. In the kitchen, my fridge was stuffed with cheap food and drinks I'd never buy, and worse, the shelves I had neatly organized were sticky with spilled soda. The whole place reeked of stale beer and old fast food. My safe haven had been turned into a frat house, and it made my stomach churn. I rolled up my sleeves and got to work. I tossed out the trash, scrubbed the counters, mopped the floor, and tried to restore some sense of order. Every time I picked up a bottle or wiped away a stain, I thought about the smug look on Karen's face when she dialed 911, about the way her son had sprawled on my couch like he owned it. The audacity of it all was something I couldn't shake. It wasn't just disrespect, it was a belief that rules didn't apply to them, that my hard-earned property was theirs to use whenever they pleased. As I cleaned, I thought about how far Karen had pushed this feud. From the very beginning, she had been a thorn in my side. Complaints about my lawn, my truck, even the way I arranged my patio furniture. She had sent letter after letter, threatening fines that weren't legally enforceable, trying to bully me into submission. I had always brushed it off, chalking it up to her being power-hungry. But now she had crossed the line into something far more serious. She had enabled her son to break into my home, and when confronted, she had doubled down and tried to weaponize the police against me. That wasn't just petty HOA nonsense. That was dangerous. By the time the cabin was clean enough to feel livable again, the clock on the wall read past midnight. I sank into the armchair by the window, looking out at the moonlit lake, and let out a long breath. I promised myself then and there that I wasn't going to let this slide. Not this time. Karen needed to learn that her fake power stopped at the edge of my driveway, and her son needed to learn that actions had consequences. The next morning, I drove straight into town and met with my attorney. I laid out everything, the break-in, the mess, the false police call. I handed over the deputy's report, which backed my story completely. My attorney nodded as he flipped through the paperwork, his expression hardening. "This is serious," he said. "Not only is this trespassing, but the false report could be grounds for a lawsuit. At the very least, we can file a restraining order to keep them both away from your property." That was exactly what I wanted. Not revenge, not drama, just peace. I wanted my cabin back, free from Karen's interference once and for all. Within a week, the restraining order was in place. Karen and her son were legally barred from setting foot on my property. The deputies made it clear that if either of them tried anything again, they'd be arrested on the spot. When the papers were served, I heard from a neighbor that Karen had thrown a fit in her front yard, shouting about corruption and abuse of power. But the law didn't care about her tantrums. For the first time, she had run headfirst into a wall she couldn't push through. Word spread quickly through the community. Neighbors who had been quiet before started coming up to me, sharing their own horror stories about Karen's bullying tactics. One couple told me how she had fined them for having flower pots that weren't uniform. Another guy admitted she once threatened to ban him from the lake because his boat was too noisy. It turned out I wasn't the only one she had tormented, I was just the first who had finally stood up to her and won. And it showed. After the restraining order, Karen's presence in the neighborhood changed completely. She no longer stormed around with her clipboard, barking orders at everyone. She no longer sent out passive-aggressive HOA memos with her ridiculous rules. People stopped taking her seriously. Her son, meanwhile, disappeared from sight, probably too embarrassed after being publicly exposed as the deadbeat who tried to squat in someone else's home. For me, life at the cabin finally returned to what it was meant to be, peaceful. I spent mornings sipping coffee on the porch, evenings fishing on the dock, and weekends enjoying the quiet I had worked so hard for. Every time I looked around, I felt a deeper appreciation for the space, not just because it was beautiful, but because I had fought to protect it. Still, every so often, I'd catch a glimpse of Karen from a distance, walking her dog, glaring across the street, whispering with the few neighbors who still tolerated her. Her eyes would lock on mine, full of bitterness, but she never stepped foot near my property again. The line had been drawn, and she knew it. And though part of me wished she would just leave the community altogether, another part of me knew that her defeat had become something bigger. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was a message to every other neighbor she had bullied, that her reign was over, that the HOA didn't make her queen, and that no one had to bow to her power games. Looking back, I realized that returning early that day, what I thought was just an inconvenience at first, ended up being the best thing that could have happened. If I hadn't, who knows how long her son would have squatted there? Who knows what kind of damage they might have done? Catching them in the act forced everything into the open, and in the end, it gave me back not only my cabin but my peace of mind. Now, whenever I sit by the lake at sunset, I remember the chaos of that night and the victory that followed. Karen thought she could twist the rules, manipulate the HOA, and even weaponize the police against me. But in the end, all she did was expose herself and her son for what they really were, liars, bullies, and opportunists who believed the world owed them something. And me? I got to keep what was mine, backed by the truth, the law, and a newfound sense of strength that no HOA could ever take away.